Hey Fuzzy Math fans, this is Mark. Thought I'd try something new today, something I've been thinking about for a while, kind of a video series. If you follow our band, you know that we do mostly original music and then an occasional creative pop cover where we take an old familiar tune and we kind of look for characteristic features we can play around with, pull apart, put back together, fuzzy it up as we say. It's kind of like drawing a caricature of a person. And so as a result, I spend a lot of time thinking about what makes some pop songs more effective than others, what makes them work. And I have this theory I've been working on. I read a book some time ago by a guy named Stephen Nachmanovitch. It's called Free Play. And he used this term bricolage, which means working with what you have. Sometimes limited resources, he contends, can spark creativity in new ways. And I think pop songs kind of have to do that. That's their challenge. I think it's fair to say that pop tends to be simpler than most jazz, certainly harmonically and often melodically and rhythmically as well. So they have to use some sort of creative techniques to generate and sustain musical interest. And I put these into kind of two basic categories. The first is more of a catch-all, really. It's just lots of little details go into a pop song that you might not even notice the first time you listen to it unless you're paying really close attention. And that's what good producers do, I guess, right? They have beats and accents and instrumentation and so forth to sustain that interest. And there's already a guy on YouTube that does a great video series called What Makes This Song Great. His name is Rick Beato, and he does lots of these, and he gets into really those details. And the second category I want to focus more on, it's sort of bigger picture. It has mostly to do with harmony, but I call it delayed gratification. And I think a lot of songs really do a pretty clever job of creating this. We talk a lot about tension and release in music, but a lot of times that gets real granular, and it's talking about how one chord kind of resolves into the next. And I'm thinking more of the overall architecture of the tune. And some pop songs do this in very simple but effective ways. And I hope to do this. My goal is with a minimum of knowledge of music theory required. We'll see how I do. But I've got some really good pop songs in mind, a couple classic Fleetwood Mac tunes that would be really fun to talk about, just as a teaser, because today I want to start with something that's kind of timely. You've probably heard it dozens of times over the last few weeks. It's the classic jingle to the Halloween movie by John Carpenter. And I know I missed Halloween by a couple weeks. I got busy. I don't want to wait a whole nother year, so I'm going to try it today for you. And I hope to break this down. And actually, as a side note, it's interesting, John Carpenter was a composer too. And apparently the story goes there a night before one of his first movies is going to go into production, and he literally just goes into a room with some synthesizers and he lays down all the music. Pretty cool. So let's take a look at what I think he did here that made this so effective and creepy. Let's start with rhythm. So the first thing I notice is that the time signature is what we call 5/4. It means the beats are kind of grouped in blocks of 5, which is unusual to our ear. The vast majority of Western music, at least that we are used to listening to, the beats are grouped in 4s, like, or 3s. But this is in 5, as you can see. Then within that 5, he has this little triplet motif that he's working with, and it starts on a downbeat and then it comes back in on an upbeat. So that's kind of got us on edge right from the start. Then let's take a look at what's going on melodically. He's starting us with this, what I call an open fifth, and kind of an airy upper register. And the open fifth is kind of an unresolved sort of interval to us. It goes back to sort of the natural overtone series. Anytime you play a note on any instrument, you'll hear a primary frequency, and then you'll hear a bunch of secondary frequencies, and those are stronger or weaker depending on the materials of the instrument and so forth. It gives it its timbre, as we call it. Hope that's not too far into the weeds, but anyway, the point is this fifth, when we hear it, our ear automatically is trained to kind of try to fit it into either a major or a minor tonality, and those require higher frequencies. And we don't have that yet. This would be an example of major. We got then we add a major third or a minor third. That's kind of what our ear is looking for, and we don't have it, but Carpenter does give us a clue next. he throws in this pattern what we actually call a minor 6. So we're pretty sure we're in minor. There are minor chords that can use a major 6, but that's a very different sound, as you'll hear. We call that kind of Dorian mode, and it's often used in jazz, but we're pretty sure we're in minor. But we're still kind of waiting for something to happen, and then something does. He gives us a big beefy F sharp, the root of this whatever kind of chord this is that we're in. We don't know yet. Then he is going to let us in on the secret. We are in minor. He gives us the minor third, which is in the bass, which is still a little jarring and unsettling. And then just like a good horror flick, we kind of think we figured out what's going on. Just like the person always goes to the window and there's nothing there, and then they turn around and wham. So what happens next is he shifts this right hand pattern down just a half a step, and the left hand is going to shift up a half a step, and we're going to go from to. Now our ear is really going, whoa, what is going on? Because what we have is we have a minor chord, but it's built on the major third of that F sharp root. Pretty creepy, pretty effective stuff. Then Carpenter's going to take this whole block that we were just talking about, and he's going to shift it down a whole step. We call that a sequence in music. But there's an interesting thing about how we get there. So we're on this, I'm going to call it A sharp minor or B flat minor if you like. Right hand is going to go down a half step, like I said. The left hand is going to move, though, by what we call a tritone. It's a very dissonant interval. Our ear is trained to like perfect fifths and perfect fourths, which again goes back to that overtone series we referenced. This is in between. And historically, it was actually called the devil's interval. So we're going to have that movement going on. And the whole block repeats itself with the E minor. He's going to give us that minor third in the bass again. And once again, right hand moves down by half step, left hand moves up by half step. Again, we're on the major third now of that E minor. Call that G sharp minor. Then Carpenter is going to give us something that feels a little more like, okay, we found a landing point here. We're going to go to sort of more traditional sounding B minor chord with kind of just a normal walk up in the left hand. Interesting here about how we get there is adding to the feeling of finality. This is the first time the right hand pattern is going to move by more than a half step, and it's actually going to move down by a major third. While the left hand is going to move up by a minor third. So we're going from to. It's kind of a simple walk up in the bass, left hand this time, nothing too fancy. So now we feel like, okay, we finally know where we're at. We landed somewhere. Then Carpenter's going to leave us hanging. He's going to go back to that original pattern in the upper register, open fifth, F sharp. And he's just going to kind of trail off with that. So now we're back to kind of like, okay, what's going to happen next? All great stuff for a horror jingle, which may be why this is the most famous horror jingle of all time. Really super creepy, effective stuff. Last thing to note is we can see there's a sort of an inner structure to this jingle, all these movements I've been talking about, and there's also an outer structure, sort of this harmonic overall pattern that I was talking about before. We have actually sort of a basic 5-4-1 with minor chords, F sharp minor, E minor, and B minor. Pretty amazing stuff. I don't know if Carpenter was aware of all these little details that I'm trying to analyze here, but either way, whether he was or wasn't, it's what we call, I guess, either genius or talent. So those are my thoughts on that. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know. Let me know if there's a pop tune that you would be interested in having me kind of break down for you and figure out maybe why I think it works. And like I said, I got a couple Fleetwood Mac tunes that I think would be really interesting to talk about as well. So take care. See you soon.